Well, in order to talk about the table, I first must talk about my interest in the work of four-time Oscar winner, Miss Katharine Hepburn, the only woman to have won 4 Oscars. At this point, who knows whether her record is going to be matched or even beaten. But as we know in the recent events with Serena Williams trying to match Margaret Court's record in tennis, the best laid schemes of mice and men go off to stray. I was actually there at Arthur Ashe Stadium when Serena totally lost it against the wonderful, talented Japanese player Naomi Osaka, who kind of threw Serena off her game because she was playing so strongly. And I think this is with Hepburn too. She threw people off the game because she played very strongly too. I remember as a kid hearing her voice, which was so distinctive on Sunday night movies, which usually was the routine in the Taylor family household. But I didn't really take much interest in her work until I went to Teachers College and sort of educating myself on the art and craft of acting. And there was a TV movie on called Love Among the Ruins. I think it was about 1977 with Hepburn and Lord Laurence Olivier. And that was the first time I really took in the strength of her personality. And I wouldn't say she had the greatest range, but she certainly had presence. From that moment, I really became quite infatuated, almost to the point of obsession. And when she died, I actually saw her perform, by the way, in West Side Waltz, which was her last Broadway show. I saw it twice in New York City. She was a New Yorker from Connecticut, actually, but she did a lot of theatre work, and it's quite surprising that she's won 4 Oscars for Best Lead, given she made so few films. I think only around 40, unlike Elizabeth Taylor, who was Elizabeth started much younger and Lassie Come Home, so she had a head start. But Hepburn loved the stage. She started as a stage actress, and she kept returning to the stage. And then when she had her love affair with Spencer Tracy, that's an original Al Hirschfeld drawing of them in Woman of the Year, that's the original poster. So when she died in 2003, I was with Nancy Swartzell, who was the co-founder of the program in educational theatre in NYU, and she had a similar sort of obsession. In fact, when I turned 50, I didn't realize she had that Hirschfeld, and she gave that to me as a 50th birthday present, which was quite thrilling. She was very cryptic. She kept saying, "Is there a wall behind that table? Is there a wall behind that table?" I thought, what is she talking about? She didn't even mention the drawing. And I said, yes, there is a wall behind that table. So getting to the table, Hepburn obviously had advised her family from Old Saybrook in Connecticut, to take care of her affairs. She was married once when she was young, but they got divorced, and she didn't have any children. She said, "My work is the theatre. I'm married to my theatre," just like Elizabeth I said, "I'm married to my kingdom," and they tried to farm her off to all these different countries, Spain, France being 2 of them. So I went to the viewing at Sotheby's in New York of all of her, what she was putting up for auction. And, she had been to Australia. She toured with Sir Robert Helpman, the great Australian ballet dancer, They were very close friends. She did a lot of Shakespeare work, and he did too. And so she had a lot of library books, and she grouped them according to the country she worked in. So she worked in Venice for summertime. She worked in Africa for the African Queen, and she worked in Australia to do this Shakespeare stuff. So there were all these different sort of archives, I suppose. It wasn't so much in the way of memorabilia. I don't think she was at all sentimental. But there was a lot of furniture. And she is on the record of saying, you know, you've got to have a relationship with your furniture. I mean, when I went to Elizabeth Taylor's auction at Christie's, which is sort of the rival auction house here, there was absolutely no furniture, except for the chair. There was jewellery and there were clothes, but there was very little in terms of any kind of household items. So I went to the viewing, and the only thing that really took my eye, I was heading off to London like the day after the auction for work reasons, was this table. And I didn't realise at the time that it's in two parts. I mean, you can actually see, well, I think you can see the join. There it is, there, you see that, how it goes. I didn't know it was in two parts. And this is Italian marble, 19th century Italian refractory table, which usually sort of is something that you might find in a church. And her very first movie, even though she had a quite distinguished career on Broadway, was A Bill of Divorcement with John Barrymore. And for some bizarre reason, which I still don't know the answer to, he gave her this table as a gift after the filming of A Bill of Divorcement. This is all written into the program, the catalogue, which I still have, by the way. So I had to register. I've never done anything like this before, and you know, they give you a paddle. It was a pretty busy auction. She was quite well known, very famous, and also very reclusive. Not to the extent of Greta Garbo, but she didn't like the press. Of course, they hounded her when she was involved with Howard Hughes. And, I don't think she was easy to deal with at the beginning. In fact, she was labelled box office poison at one point. So, got the paddle, and we get to the table, raise the paddle. You know, there was some bidding, but not as intense as it was for Elizabeth's chair, that's for sure. And, you know, the hammer went down and, you know, sold to me. I can hardly believe it. And because in her front townhouse in Turtle Bay here in New York, I saw a picture of the table in her townhouse. It's actually in the catalogue. She had this lamp because she was very athletic and she loved building things. So she actually made this lamp, and this lamp was on the table. So they say that this happens to first timers quite often, first time auctionees, that you get kind of carried away, which I did, totally, and I ended up buying the bloody table, the bloody lamp on top of the table. And this is exactly where she had it, the position. Can you believe it? I haven't had this treated, and I really should, because you can see it sort of form. I'm even scared to touch it because I worry the whole thing's going to collapse. So then I thought, well, I paid all this money for the table and the lamp. I'm going to London. I have to put it into storage. I thought, it's not even going to fit in your apartment, you crazy idiots. Because I was living downtown at that stage. And I didn't realise it was in two pieces, you see. So I thought I'll put it into storage, but I'm not using Sotheby's. They're a big rip-off because they charge the commission, which I think is like 20% on the purchase. You have to pay a commission to the auction house. So, you know, how are you going to afford all of this? So off we go, and I thought, I'll get a cheaper storage house. So I went through the Yellow Pages, and I saw this place up in the Bronx. It was called The Right Move, and so I called them, and they were quoting good rates. And yes, you have to give us authorization to pick it up from Sotheby's, and yes, we'll look after it for you. No worries. Right, so I gave them the authorization, and off I go to London for 3 weeks. Now I had goods stored in Brisbane, and I never received a monthly bill until I took them out. Hey, I've got the dog here. Calmness. So I didn't worry when I didn't get a monthly bill, and I thought it's too much of a burden anyway to worry about right now. You can just go into storage. 2 or 3 years later, I decide, oh well, you better just get it out and deal with it, and figure it out. Maybe it will fit in the server's elevator. You know, maybe I can get it up there. I mean, I knew if I got it in, I'd be fine. So then I call the Right Move, and the line's dead. There's no one responding. I thought, oh my God. What's happened to the Right Move? So I did a number of inquiries. Maybe they're listed under another number or something, and no. So then the panic, warning, a danger, Will Robinson. So I said to a friend of mine, we've got to go up there to find out what's going on with the Right Move. So, because I didn't have a car, and I didn't want to go by myself. So I went with him up there, and it was something out of Jack Nicholson's The Shining. This abandoned garage with broken windows and totally empty, except for a service station that was next door. So I went next door to the service station, and I said, what's going on with the Right Move? And the response was, oh, that crowd is totally shoddy. Yeah, you wouldn't trust them. They've been involved in so many dubious enterprises. No, mate, don't give, well, I didn't say mate, don't give you much hope, but you better report it to the local police station. So you go off to the local police station. I mean, this is a total nightmare. And they basically confirmed what the service station people said, that we don't know where they are. We've got no way of reaching them. So, all you can do is file, a sort of complaint, which is what I did. And so then people would ask me, what's going on with that table? I said, well, the Right Move turned out to be the wrong move. And and then I got to the point where I just couldn't talk about it anymore. I was just imagining that this table was sitting in someone's backyard and had tools over it, and nobody would know the provenance of the table. And of course, then I didn't really give any thought to the lamp, because the table was the principal item of interest. So then I go on sabbatical, and I was living in this building downtown, which was actually a student dorm, but on the top floor, the 32nd floor, which they called the penthouse, was reserved for faculty housing, and that's where they put me. I mean, I was quite happy there, had a great view over the city, and it was relatively quiet. But because there were 32 floors, they had what was called the express elevator, and then the regular one, 1 to 16, and then 16, so this was an opportunity in the elevator while the students are coming in, going out, to go through your mail. So I was away for a year. I sublet my apartment, and of course I was on Sotheby's mailing list, given my purchase. And so I'm going through the mail in the elevator, and there's this letter from Sotheby's, which I was going to just chuck, but then I noticed that the addressing was somewhat more personalised. postcard, and it was an envelope. So I open up the envelope in the elevator, and I'm sort of kind of confused as to what I'm reading. We've done an inventory of our stock, and we've noticed that lots so and so, the two lot numbers, the table and the lamp, have not been collected from Sotheby's. I said, what? True Elizabeth Taylor style. And yeah, never left Sotheby's. And then, yes. So then, I thought, stuff it, I'll just get the table here and I'll deal with it. And to my shock, because I gave them the measurements of the service elevator, I thought, well, it might just squeeze into the service elevator. It's not that long. I mean, it is long, but it's not that long. And so to my shock, when it finally arrived, it was in two pieces. I could have got it in there all the time. I could have actually had it in there whilst I was in London. I had more than enough time to do that, a couple of days. And so that's the story of the Catherine Hepburn table. Table and the lamp from Sotheby's. I became infatuated with all things. After it returned to me, I became infatuated with all things Hepburn. So I started to get very interested in movie posters. So this would have been around 2008, well, not all that long ago, to be honest. And so whenever I saw a theatrical poster, and when they use that term here, theatrical, they don't mean just a theatre poster. They mean a poster that has been displayed in an art house to promote the work. So it's considered an original, original memorabilia, not commercial copies, but material that actually is sent to the art house to display. So I started to collect quite a few original posters of Hepburn and others. So Catherine, Katie as she was known to her friends, or Kathy, Kath, she got very intimately involved with the great American actor Spencer Tracy. Now, he had a lot of health issues, and they kind of seemed an unlikely match in many ways, but she adored him, and we gather that he was in love with her, but he wouldn't divorce his wife because they were devout Catholics and they had a son who was deaf, and he just didn't think he could do it. But it caused great confliction in him. And so she ended up tending to him quite often, and George Cukor, the director, actually found Catherine Hepburn for her movie A Bill of Divorcement, discovered her, I suppose. He had a compound in Los Angeles, and he had a bungalow at the back, so Hepburn and Tracy would have their dalliances in the bungalow, would spend a lot of time there. And that relationship started in 1940 and it ended to the day he died. It was either 66 or 67, and it was pretty intense. And she was actually in that bungalow the early morning when he collapsed making a cup of tea, and he had a massive heart attack and he died. She didn't go to the funeral, she didn't think it would be appropriate. Now, she shared a director with Audrey Hepburn, the other Hepburn. Now, they weren't related. Many people think they were, but they weren't. Audrey was from England, had a very different life from Catherine. Audrey grew up in the war, and her family struggled, and whereas Hepburn sort of came from a fairly privileged background. But they shared a common director
course, George directed Audrey in My Fair Lady. And Hepburn made a few movies with George, but he never made any movie with Audrey. She never made any movie with Audrey. But when Spencer died, or Spence as he was known to his friends, I feel like I know these people, it's kind of bizarre. Audrey must have written to Catherine offering her condolences. Catherine writes back to Audrey. Audrey lived in Switzerland. In this letter, I mean, she had a very distinguished writing style, really reflecting on the meaning of life and the challenges of dealing with the loss of a loved one. It's actually quite moving, and so one of the other auction houses, Bonham's, brought quite a bit from them. They put this up. Was it Bonham's? Well, they didn't put it up. Her sons, Sean and Luca, Audrey's two boys, they put it up for auction. I'm sure it was through Bottoms. I'll have to check the files. And yes, Marty Mouse got it. I paid a bit of money for this. And then the sons wrote a letter acknowledging the purchase. But they say in collector's land, a letter that actually is personalised and is meaningful, individualised. Those are the ones that the auction houses really like. And then, of course, at the other end of the table is the picture. She was a great artist, Catherine, and she would draw. And so she drew this picture of I think they call it the American Shakespeare Theatre. I've never been there. I think it's in Connecticut, I'm not too sure. So, where?
Just been there.
Oh. I was just told it burnt down. She performed quite often there, and so that's her original drawing. It almost looks like the globe. I suppose they were all modelled in the same way, weren't they? Back in Elizabethan times. So, yes, and from all of this, I got thinking about setting up my own business and getting involved in collector's land. So, as a young kid, growing up in Melbourne, Australia, watching these Sunday night movies on Channel 7 mostly, Sunday night at the movies, I was struck by the number of times I saw the name Elizabeth Taylor in the credits. I thought, oh, I wonder if we're related. I was kind of, ooh. Of course, we weren't related. But she was quite a wonderful influence on me, not just through her performing work, but through her philanthropy. She became very involved with the work of AMFAR, which is dedicated to AIDS, HIV research. And she only ever made one movie with Katharine Hepburn, and that was in the year of my birth, 1959. We're now in 2019, 60 years later. And that movie was Tennessee Williams' play, Suddenly Last Summer, where she plays this sort of demented woman who, it's also that famous movie where she's wearing the white bathing suit. And Katharine Hepburn plays a very strict mother, and Elizabeth's very good friend, Montgomery Clift, otherwise known as Monty. He plays the doctor attending to her. So, of course, when she died, I think it was about 2011 or thereabouts, she had arranged to put most, if not all, of her jewellery up for auction at Christie's, and there were a couple of furniture pieces, but not many. But there was this chair, and I thought, well, there's no way known that I'm not going to bid on that. And I knew I was going to have to go into the vault for this one, which is what ultimately happened. So I got the chair, which sort of goes with the table, but I'm too scared to sit in the chair because I worry that the thing's going to collapse on me. Even though it is quite a firm, it's not like your regular director's chair. And it means a lot. And I've been thinking of taking this chair back to Melbourne with me, but I'd be scared stiff to get it there because I just had this terrible incident on a United plane that nearly had to ditch en route from Melbourne to Los Angeles, so we were diverted to New Caledonia. So can you imagine if the chair was in the plane? I mean, it's irreplaceable item. So I'm in two minds about that now. I keep oscillating from one to the other. So yes, I've set up this business, Creative Codes, which specialises in original theatre, which includes movie, memorabilia. There's also some sporting items there as well. And we're going to start selling. I'm retiring May the 31st, 2019, from NYU. Not to say that I wouldn't have another teaching gig left in me, but I've been teaching for 40 years, which is a long time, particularly teaching drama, because it's not like you're teaching math or science where the kids are sort of locked into these traps, these desks. You know, in teaching drama, you're constantly surrounded by personalities. So I feel like I've done my bit, really, for teaching. And now I want to give this Creative Codes business a go. We've got close to 2,000 items in the collection. And I've got a great advisory board who just want me to get cracking on this. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Well, as I said before, and when you heard that I have been teaching for 40 years, at all levels really, maybe not pre-K, but just about every other level that you can imagine. And been very fortunate to work with some amazingly gifted and generous educators in Australia, New York obviously, and other places. Because my position at NYU has a strong commitment, or the institution has a strong commitment to global education. We've taken students to England, to Ireland, to Australia, to Puerto Rico, and most interestingly, to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where we had the opportunity of working with one of the great theatre innovators, activists, educators, the late, great Augusto Boal. Now, I'd worked with Boal in Nottingham, in England, when I was working on my master's, actually. I knew he was doing a workshop over there in Nottingham, and so I funded myself, basically. Got a loan, and went and worked with him for a week. And that was extraordinary because there were people from all over the world in that room, and he had a particular way of getting the body released, getting the mind released, enabling people to share the stories of their lives and using the art form as the medium, especially for revealing torment, oppression. He created this whole movement called Theatre of the Oppressed. And that was an eye-opener for me because, I tended to be very sort of, not complacent, but, just try and keep everything at an even keel and, we don't want to ruffle too many feathers. But the good thing about doing further education is that it does open your mind and, that education shouldn't just be about, the maintaining equilibrium, but promoting disequilibrium, which is what I discovered through my studies. And one of the influential educators from England, Dorothy Hethcote, who I did have an opportunity of working with, and I even employed her to work at New York University. She had this wonderful term about the most important thing to get children, kids, adults to understand is to tolerate the ambiguity. And that statement really made an impression on me, like dealing with dissonance and, getting yourself out of the mess, figuring it out, I found that very powerful. So you could literally say that it was around about when I was 26, 27, I'd already taught 6 years in Australia in schools. That was when my, I suppose, activism, my research really began. And I got very excited in the movement of process drama, which is all powered by Dorothy Hethcote's teachings, and then working with Boal. So his movement, the Theatre of the Oppressed, was tremendously helpful in enabling us to think about human rights education and how theatre can be used as a vehicle to promote social welfare, human dignity, how we can combat the oppressors in our lives. And I got quite close to him in Rio because I went there, I think, about three times, and got to know his team. He called his teachers jokers because he said the joker can play all cards and all suits in the deck. They have to play many roles. They have to be enabler, they have to be supporter, they have to be a director, they have to be a designer, they have to be a learner, and most importantly, they have to be a teacher. So I got to meet some amazing people there, and it's I've been so grateful to these educators for supporting me and mentoring me, and then I've been in a position where I've mentored students, and they've gone on to wonderful positions, and I know I've got another teaching gig in me, but it'll be in a different sort of environment, and it will be in Melbourne. It'll definitely be in Melbourne, so I can take back all these things that I have learned, all these ideas, all these activities. I can take back to my home, my hometown. So maybe I'll see you there. Take care.
What would you say is the long-lasting contribution of Dorothy Hethcote?
Oh, powerful. Literally changed people's lives, not only children's lives, but teachers' approaches to the field of drama education. She wasn't interested in watered-down drama. She was interested in the power of drama to transform, even though I know that's a very controversial word, to change the way people thought about themselves, and most importantly about the world in which they lived. And also the role of the teacher. She wasn't one of these educators who was sort of glued to the walls, facilitating, spontaneous role plays. Isn't it all so beautiful? She was very much sort of an interventionist, I suppose you could say, and helping to sculpt and recognising her own contribution to the process of education. And I guess she's known for many things, but most influentially at the beginning of my career was her work in role, using role not so much for characterization purposes, but for taking on these different mantles to help create an experience in the classroom where the students become collaborators with the teacher rather than following the instructions of the teacher. They negotiate together. And she came to New York a couple of times, brought her family, got the students involved, and she came down to London and worked with our study abroad program in England. And I suppose she was a controversial figure in the sense that for the purists, the so-called artistes, they thought she was sort of disturbing things too much, and they saw her as anti-theatre, but I never saw her that way. I thought it was highly theatrical, to be honest, and very cleverly sculpting these moments in a classroom into these powerful learning experiences and challenging students to take responsibility for their own actions. I was thrilled to have met her. I was a bit intimidated at first, but we got to know each other. I would call her quite regularly. She was an early riser, which suited me with the time difference in New York, and we got to know each other, and it was a great loss to the community when she finally passed. She actually was awarded an OBE from the Queen for her contributions to education. She didn't get to go to the palace, unfortunately, to receive it. But she spawned a whole generations of famous drama educators. She worked very closely with Gavin Bolton in Durham, and Cecily O'Neill, obviously, the late David Booth, Canadian educator, Larry Schwartz, Kathleen Gallagher, John O'Toole. There's just so many people who she influenced, and the classroom and the world is in a better off position for having someone like Dorothy in it.
Can you tell me any funny stories from your time at NYU?
Well, the best story, John, is involving Lowell and Nancy Swartzell and Augusto Boel. And I know you will appreciate this because you went to Rio. What was that year?
Oh gosh, 2000. In 2000, I think it was the first year.
I think it was the first year. I mean, I didn't know him well, but I did know him. And do you remember Jan Cohen Cruz?
Yes.
So she and Richard Schechner were pretty influential in getting Boel to the United States. Do you know this story?
I think I do.
And I mean, Jan was very into Theatre of the Oppressed in a big way. I'm not sure what's happened to her now. I don't know where she is. Anyway, she and I became quite chummy because I was very fond of her book. I
one of the books, and I reached out to her, and we met, and we had coffee, and people like folks who have some interest in your work. So then she left NYU, she left Tisch, and then she went upstate, and I lost touch with her. But Schechner was pretty much influential in getting Boel to the United States. Then Nancy Swartzow, she developed an interest, and Jan said to Nancy, I was a teaching assistant at this stage. We're going back 87, 88, thereabouts. I was a teaching assistant, and Nancy was notorious for really working her assistants hard. I mean, a lot of people couldn't deal with Nancy, to be honest, because she was so difficult. And, she would whip, and that's the way she was. I mean, she was old school. So I was living in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. This is a great story. This is a fantastic story. I was living in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and I was Nancy's assistant. She calls me on a Sunday night there in Greenpoint, in my little flats, and she says, "You've got to get your ass." This is how she would speak to you. I mean, I kind of found it endearing, to be honest, because she was very good to me. She gave me money, and she included me at all of her occasions. They had great Thanksgiving dinners. "You've got to get your ass out to Kennedy tomorrow at 6 a.m. I said, "Well, what's happening out at Kennedy then, Nancy?" The Boels are arriving." This is how she presented it to me. "The Boels are arriving. You know him," because I had studied with him in Lancaster. So I did know him. "You've got to go out and pick up the Boels." So she said, "Get the train out there, but bring them back in a taxi." This is how she spoke to you. "Get the train out there, the A train, but bring them back in a taxi. I'll pay for the taxi." I said, "Well, I presume I have to." I mean, we used to have these little gags. I said, "Well, presumably I have to pay for the A train then." It was like $1.10 then. Hey! So I go out there, and he knew me. He didn't know me well, but he knew me. So the wife, Cecilia, and then little Julian, he was only like 15 then. He was only 15 then, or 16. So it's Julian, and it's Augusto, although he was always known as Boel. I mean, and the woman, the wife, Cecilia. And I said to her, "You remind me of a very famous Hollywood actress." And because she didn't speak a word of English, but he did, because he studied at Columbia. He studied physics, or he spoke English perfectly, but she didn't. I said, "You remind me of a great Hollywood actress," but she didn't know what I was talking about. And he said, "Which one?" I said, "Well, she did all those World War II movies." I mean, what was her name, John? She did all those World War II movies. Very famous. I don't think she ever won an Oscar, but
she was very attractive, and it'll come to me eventually. So, so I'm taking them to 76 Washington Square Place, which is where the Swartzels lived. They had this wonderful townhouse, 4-story. And when Lowell died in 2004 or thereabouts, Nancy's lawyer, who actually happened to be my lawyer too, Richard Cutler, he said, "Don't make any rash decisions, Nancy. Don't make any rash decisions with the house. Just sit there." But it was a huge house. I mean, it was 4 stories, it was massive. They had no children, no heirs. And what distant relations they had, they didn't like them anyway. So I knew she was frightened to be in that house by herself, and I said to her, "Do you want me to move in?" "No, I'm going to sell it." She said, "I'm going to sell it, and I'm just going to ask for the asking price." And so she sold the house, and then she moved into 24 Fifth Avenue, just around the corner from me. A little 2-bedroom, but it had 2 bathrooms. Each bedroom had a bathroom, and Cecily would stay there, and she had friends and all this sort of business. So she said to me, this is before Lowell died, "Get your ass," this is how she spoke to me, "out to Kennedy to pick up the Boels." I said, "All right, fine." So I take the train, the A train, out to Kennedy. This is a great story. And the flight was coming in from Brazil at like 5:30 a.m. And, of course there weren't many people out there, but, so he knew my face, so I said, well, and he was going to stay with Nancy for the first few nights in that house with, Cecilia and the boy, Julian Boal. So I picked them up and I take them in the taxi. We went the wrong way around. The whole thing was a total disaster. So anyway, in those days, Boal was known for having the hair. I mean, he had this sort of hair. But on this particular occasion, he had coiffured his hairstyle, so he didn't really have the hair. But Cecilia, the wife, had the hair. She had the hair. So in their house, they rented out the ground floor to the doctors, and then so you had to walk up the stairs to get into the kitchen and all sort of business. Well, it was like a comedy of errors. So we're all walking up the stairs. I was at the back. I was at the rear. It's always a good place to be, John. I was at the rear, and Nancy had mistaken Augusto for, because Cecilia had the hair, and he had, so she went walking down the stairs. And, "Oh, Augusto, it's so good to see you again." So she was wrapping her arms around Cecilia, thinking that it was Augusto because of the hair. And I'm sort of pointing out, no, Josephine. And then she did a quick double take, because she was an actress trained at Yale School of Drama. She did an immediate double take. Oh, and of course, and then she, the whole thing was kind of very funny. The whole thing was very funny. I mean, Lowell was in his pajamas, and I mean, it was pretty early. It was like 5 a.m. And yes. So That's my Boal story. The other interesting thing about Boal is when we were in Rio, I don't know whether you remember this, John, but I had this theft. Someone nicked my bank card. It was terrible because in those days, they don't do it now, but in those days, if you were running a study abroad program, they would put all the money into your personal bank account. They don't do this now. But all the money to run the program went into my account, and the card had got lost. And Boal, God bless him, he said, because he was known as being a bit of a tight-ass Jack, and he always demanded money up front when he worked at NYU, into his Citibank account. Hey! He always demanded money up front, but he knew that the card was lost and everything was terrible, and I had no way of paying for field trips, couldn't pay for the buses. I couldn't pay for the buses. And he said, I'll give you whatever you want. Can you believe it? I'll give you whatever you want. I said, well, I think I can, through Citibank, I think I can get $1,000 a day and through emergency funds. So yes, those were the good old days.
I know you know David Booth recently passed away, and I know you were very close to him. Do you have any recollections from your time together?
Well, David Booth was a giant, not only in my life, but in the lives of so many others. And I had the great fortune of hosting him and his son, Jay, in Melbourne, the University of Melbourne, and he did a wonderful masterclass when I was working there on story drama, and he allowed me to videotape that and to document it, and I was fortunate enough to be able to transcribe it and include it. He seemed very happy that I was doing this. In my book, The Drama Classroom, Action, Reflection, Transformation, ART, Action, Reflection, Transformation, Art. And he was tremendously powerful, charismatic personality, and wonderful teacher, and he loved working with kids. I mean, Larry Schwartz will tell you this, and Kathleen in Toronto, and Wayne Fairhead. He loved working with kids. Not many people are comfortable working with children, but he loved working with kids, and he enjoyed it, and they enjoyed him. And he had such a strong personality that, one of my regrets is when I got to know Dorothy, she wasn't so much doing teacher enroll work then, she was doing other stuff. But he was doing teacher enroll, and he was really quite the presence. And I got to see firsthand the power of teacher enroll, really, from watching him, because he could drift kids into the work just through the sheer presence of his personnel. I wouldn't say he was evangelical, but he did sort of have that characteristic. He could be quite intimidating, and he was sort of opinionated. He loved Dorothy. And I remember 1993 when they did that big conference, Lancaster or wherever it was in England, for Dorothy. He was mesmerised. He said, I have to sit, because we had these sort of formal dinners
he said, I have to sit next to Dorothy. I mean, he was just mesmerized by her, and he was powerful, and I was very happy that I could write about his work. I mean, Cecily just wrote to me on the weekend. She said, that was masterful. I mean, I wouldn't describe it as masterful, my description of his work, but I mean, she did. And, it's kind of nice to get that sort of compliment, and they don't come across every day, and I don't think you're going to see people like Gavin, Dorothy, Cecily. I just don't. Jonathan Nealons, Julianus. I just don't think you're going to see those people every day. I mean, I don't know where they're coming from. To be honest, everyone's so conservative. No one wants to think outside of the box. And fortunately for me, I got to work with them and got to know them. So there you go.
What got you started and excited and passionate about educational theater?
Well, many things. So when I started my academic career at the University of Melbourne, I was on what is called limited tenure contract there. 3 years, terrible. And I could see that the enrollments were declining rapidly, and there were 3 of us in drama education, and I just knew that there wasn't going to be work for me. I just knew it. So when the job came up at Griffith University in Brisbane, even though I did not want to go up there, because I'm a Melbourne boy, born and raised, I did not want to go to Brisbane. But I thought, well, I suppose I have to. I've got no alternative, to be honest. So, I went up there, and it was sort of an interesting time to be in Brisbane. I mean, in the United States, if you want to get to the hot weather, you go south to Florida. In Australia, you go north. That's where the beaches are. Not that I'm a beach person, certainly don't like wearing Speedos. So I went up there, and it was kind of an interesting time because the International Drama Educational Association was having their big conference in Brisbane. And I went to the first one in Porto, Portugal, and Wayne came with me, and it was sort of a big event. And then Brisbane was hosting the next one, and so I just happened to be moving up there at the time when IDEA, the International Drama Educational Theatre Association, was having their conference. So I thought, well, you've got to, if you're going to sort of be relocating up there, you've got to make a big bash. And so I invited the people who I knew that was going to IDEA. Would you like to hang around for a week afterwards, and we can do a little research, because this was my big thing then, qualitative research, teacher research in particular, reflective practice. So I asked a few mates, like I had asked Cecily, I asked Gavin, I asked Lowell and Nancy, I asked a number of Australians, would you like to hang around? We'll do this little institute on research. And they said yes. Great. So, and I was a bit chummy with the editor of Falmer Press, and I said, I think we could get a good book out of this. And he agreed with me. And so researching drama and arts education emerged from that first, what then became known as the Institute of Drama Education Research. It wasn't meant to be an event that was going to carry on, but Juliana and Carol got very excited by it. They were there. So then they said, well, we'll have the next one in the University of Victoria, British Columbia. I said, great. And then Ohio, Cecily was then working at Ohio. They then decided to carry it on. And it's been carrying on. I mean, it's sort of unbelievable. It has no sort of governance. It's just whoever wants to, raise the hand, and went to Sydney, and I, as much as I would like to take credit for that, it was really just an idea, to be honest, and people kind of got attracted to it, and it's helped the field, no doubt, and a number of good books have come out of it, and now here at NYU, Jonathan Jones, Dr. Jones, is doing arts praxis now, and he's carrying on the legends, and that's what it's all about. It's all about the next sort of field, moving on.
Dr. Taylor, you've talked about Neil Postman. How did he inspire you and inform your work?
Well, I was fortunate when I was studying my master's at NYU, worked with some amazing people like John Hodgson in Breton Hall College. Powerful influence on me, even though I didn't agree with him on everything, but he certainly was a figure. And at that particular time, Neil Postman, Entertaining Ourselves to Death. I mean, I don't know whether you read that book, John. And the other one, the big one, 66. What was that one called? That was hugely influential to me. I can't remember. He did it with his colleague. It was all about changing the face of education in schools. And he happened to be the chair of the department that I was studying. And he didn't like to be in his office. So he, because I was sort of on the payroll, I had to work with him. He didn't like to be in his office. He wanted his office to be in the commonplace. He was very much a person of the people. And so he would set up his office in the corridor. I mean, literally, he would have his office in the corridor. And, people would come and talk to him, and that's the way he wanted it. And he was very interested in me, I guess because I was an Australian and so somewhat different. And he had this sort of intrigue, I suppose. But Nancy was organising a conference, and I said, well, do you want me to invite Neil? Oh, he won't come. I mean, Nancy was very theatrical. I mean, she used to sit there with her fags. This is how... He won't come. I mean, this is how she would speak to you. There's no way now you're going to get him. I said, oh, well, he might. I mean, he seems to like me, and, we chat in the corridor. So I said, Neil, and he didn't want to be called Professor Postman. It was all very first-name basis. I said, Nancy's organising this conference in educational theatre. Would you be interested in talking? Sure. I'll come and talk. So I said to Nancy, he's coming to talk. Well, she couldn't believe it. I can't believe it. I said, well, I just asked him, and, he said, he would come and talk. So he became sort of, the second book was Entertaining Ourselves to Death, but what was the first one? That was the classic one. I'm sure I have it on the shelf. But he was, the good thing I learned from a young age when I was starting my career is the importance of mentorship and people, taking an interest in you and, you taking an interest in them. And usually even with Jessica Lang in this building, you've got an interest in her, she's got an interest in you. I said to her, I have a number of your posters. And she said, which ones? I said, well, I've got, King Kong. I've got Blue Sky. I've got The Postman Always Rings Twice. Rattled off a few other names that I can't remember. I said, it'd mean the world to me if you would sign them. I'll do whatever you want. I'm going to work in the West Coast. But, of course, she has... I haven't actually seen her since she's returned. But she said, when I get back, I'll sign whatever you want. To me, that's all that you need. That's all that you need. I don't need her to sign anything. It's just the fact that she said that she would do it. Miss Lang. I had to gird my loins in the elevator. And, I had the dog Sunday morning... 9 a.m., 10 a.m., going out for a walk, and, it was jam-packed. I said, I'll get the next one, because there are 3 elevators in this building. I'll get the next one. And this chubby man said, oh, no, there's room enough for you and the dogs. So I get in. So I get into the elevator, and I could feel her presence. I could feel it because I've seen her on Broadway. I have a number of her Broadway posters. I saw her in that Streetcar Named Desire where this was extraordinary. With Alec Baldwin, I have that poster in the bedroom. This was extraordinary. It was when the boy comes in. It was a matinee performance. The boy comes in. The post kid comes in, and there was this default in the electrics in the theatre, and it suddenly went zzz, and it was just and I was there by myself. But I said to the fellow sitting next to me, I said, "There's something wrong with the acoustics here in this theatre," and he said, "I think you're right." And it just kept going on. Zzz. It was like this. Zzz, zzz. And she then, I did remind her of this. She then whacked her head between her knees and she said, "I can't continue." And with that, the curtain went down. The curtain went down. So then they sort of fixed the acoustics, and then they just picked up the curtain, and she carried on like, nothing. She is a phenomenal actress. She started off as a mime. I don't know whether you know this, John. She studied with Marcel Marceau in France. That's where she wanted to be. And then she had a child with Mikhail Baryshnikov. You do see that child beautiful, as you can imagine. And then she hooked up with Sam Shepard, the great American playwright who died a few years ago. So many stories. We won't get into Catherine.
One of your happy stories from your teaching.
Yes. So, every Wednesday afternoon, we all had to be assigned sporting duties. So, this would range from table tennis, badminton, football, Australian rules football, soccer, cricket, chess. I mean, there were all these different duties. We all had to be involved. There was no, you couldn't back out of that. That was part of your duties. So Carl came up to me. He was the sports master, and he says to me, "I'm assigning you to cricket, the under 14 or under 15s competition." I said, "Carl," he said, "I'm assigning you to the cricket squad." I said, "Carl, I don't know the first thing about cricket." I mean, also, it's a very complicated game. I mean, it's very difficult to understand. He said, "You'll figure it out." He said, "Basically, all I need is someone to drive the boys in the van." Now, you wouldn't get away with this today, but back then you didn't need a license to be driving. I mean, you would need a license today, but back then you didn't need a license. So basically, what he was asking me to do was to drive these boys, these 14-year-olds. I mean, the squad was about 12 people, in the minivan to the competition on a Wednesday afternoon. I said, "You've got to be fucking kidding me. This is," he said, "here's the rule book." And he literally gave me the rule book. And he said, "Just study it up, you'll be fine." So, I sort of took it home and I was reading it, and I thought, I don't understand any of these positions. I mean, silly mid-off, and I mean, they're all such peculiar language. I mean, it's a British game, but Australians are totally into it. The Canadians aren't, and the Americans certainly aren't. So I had to drive the van to these competitions every Wednesday afternoon, different schools. And, fortunately, I mean, Carl did say to me, "Don't worry about these boys. They know how to play cricket." I said, "All right." He said, "You're just going to have to supervise them, for their training on Tuesday." I said, "Carl, I don't know the first thing about training boys in cricket." He said, "Don't worry, they'll run themselves. They're very talented." Well, he was right. They were great kids. And they knew that I knew nothing. I mean, this was a great education to me. They knew that I knew nothing. And I wasn't trying to be an expert. I mean, how could I be on cricket? Because I didn't know the first thing about the game anyway. And they knew that. And they were great kids. And from that, I sort of learnt a lot about the game. And ever since then, I've been a great fan of cricket.
So, what is your favorite Katharine Hepburn story?
Well, of course, it has to be The Table. Which many people do know. But there was a time when no one would talk to me about The Table because they knew that this was a terrible event in my life. So I go rocking up to Sotheby's. I heard it on the radio that, Miss Hepburn's estate, she died in 2003, I think, or thereabouts. And her family, she obviously had made provision that Sotheby's, one of the great auction houses in New York, would auction her estate. Now, I knew about her work very well. Too well, actually. And so I thought, well, you just have to go up there. you have to go up there. So Sotheby's is on like 83rd Street. It's way over on the east side of Manhattan. So I go rocking up there, and it was just before I was heading off to London for work purposes. And, you know, I sort of rushed through the display. She had a lot of books. She was a great reader. And a lot of furniture. And then, of course, she had the table. For some peculiar reason, after her first movie, I mean, she was a stage actress before. She was a movie actress. Well known in the Broadway, off-Broadway theatre. But her first movie, 1932, A Bill of Divorcement, directed by George Cukor, who was a wonderful, wonderful director. I think he discovered Betty Davis as well as Katharine Hepburn and Joan Crawford and others. The women loved him. After her first movie, A Bill of Divorcement, which she did with John Barrymore, of the great Barrymore. I mean, Drew is the current citizen of the Barrymores, but that Barrymore clan dragged on throughout the generations. For some peculiar reason, which I still don't understand, John Barrymore, who starred with her in A Bill of Divorcement in 1932, her first movie, he gave her this refractory table. It's a 19th century Italian refractory table with the marble inserts. It's actually in two pieces, which I didn't realise at the time I bought it. But it's in two pieces. He gave her this table. So when I go to Sotheby's to do my little inspections, I thought, oh, this table is kind of cute. I'll bid on that. So I signed up to bid, got the panel. First time I've really actually done this. I mean, I've done it for Elizabeth Taylor. I was a bit more experienced. I bid on the table, and you have to pay this 20% premium thing. I think I paid $8,000 for this table, but I had to pay the 20% premium, and then obviously sales tax and all sort of business. It was just a fucking nightmare, the whole thing. I thought, what have you done? You can't even fit. I was living downtown then. I thought, you're not even going to be able to fit this fucking thing into your apartment. Just put it into storage. So this is the story of the table. So haven't I told this story already?